My pleasure to welcome Matthew Ray, who comes to us from Eastminster Presbyterian. We're going to talk about the history of musical instruments in religious worship.
Okay, so so the topic today is kind of fun. So, the history of instrumental music in worship across different cultures and lands and religions, and that's just such a fun thing. You could do like a 10-part series on this, but I wanted to do the condensed version so we don't fall asleep. So the history of sacred music and world religions. So we'll start with Hinduism, and this was really interesting to me. So in Hinduism, music is deeply intertwined with religious practices and mythology, viewed as a form of divine expression. So the Vedas, which are the ancient scriptures for the Hindu people, contain hymns and chants meant to be performed with a specific melodic structure known as the ragas, to highlight the importance of different parts of the vocal music. So instrumental music to them features prominently in their worship and in their practice, with various instruments used for worship, for temple rituals, and for devotional time, and for singing. So as an example, there's the veena, which is an ancient plucked string instrument, and it's often associated with Sarawata, who is the goddess of knowledge and music. That is kind of cool. And then there's the mrigdam, I think is how you say it, and that's a double-headed drum that provides rhythmic accompaniment to devotional music. And then a conch shell, which is used to announce beginnings and ends of ceremonies, which is very interesting. I found one of the things that ties all of these different religions together is the use of different instruments to signify the beginning and the end of worship, and for different elements within services and rituals. So very interesting. And the overall purpose of music in Hinduism is to serve as an offering to the deities, to enhance spiritual ambience of rituals, and to foster connection to the divine, which is really something that's common among a lot of the different faith traditions. So in Buddhism, basically this is, the title I gave this section was From Auspicious Sounds to Meditative Tools. So it has a variety of different, musical instruments have a variety of purposes within Buddhism. So while early Buddhist texts show some reservations towards music as a potential distraction, and this is a theme you'll see throughout several of the different faith traditions, which I find interesting. Mahayana Buddhism views music more positively as an offering and a means of enlightenment. So chanting of sutras and mantras is a common practice, a lot of times accompanied by musical instruments. And in Tibetan Buddhism, they use trumpets, cymbals, and drums in monastic rituals and performances. In Japanese Zen Buddhism, they usually use a flute, sometimes pan flute, played by wandering monks for meditation and alms. So in Buddhist music, including chant, it's all seen as a form of meditation and a way to foster mindfulness. So, and some of those practices continue in different traditions as well. And like I said, the debate over the use of instruments is something that's they've struggled with for centuries. And again, this ties into a lot of different traditions. So in Sikhism, the title I gave this one is Music as a Path to the Divine. And in Sikhism, music, Gurmat Sangeet is the term for the music, is central to worship and involves singing hymns, shabads, from the Guru, Granth Sahib, which is the Holy Scripture that they use. So hymns are composed in different forms, and they have different structures to them. But some of the instruments that they use are the rabab, which is a plucked string instrument. And you'll find a lot of these string instruments kind of repeat themselves in different forms through these different traditions. And it is let's see here, what else do we have? Oh, and was famously played by Mardana, who was a companion of the very first guru. So the saranda, which is another stringed instrument, but it's a bowed string instrument that's designed more for devotional singing. It's more for individuals to use. And then the jori, which is a pair of drums symbolizing inner rhythm and discipline. And so the gurus first introduced instruments not just for performance, but as tools to enhance personal enlightenment and focus, and to deepen philosophical understanding, and to connect with the divine. So this is just really fascinating. And then kind of across the different Eastern religions, music and instruments serve diverse purposes, so various different purposes, from glorifying the divine and facilitating rituals to fostering mindfulness and promoting community engagement. So now we move on to instrumental music in Islam. So, and this is again interesting, I found that there were debates within the Islamic community over the use of instrumental music, which again is mirrored in a lot of Eastern religions and even in Christianity today. So, and it's crucial to understand that the term music held a different meaning in the early Islamic period. So this often refers to secular art music, which is distinct from religious chants or folk songs, all of which use instrumental music. So early Islamic music emerged as a blend of pre-Islamic Arabian music and musical traditions of various conquered peoples. So it drew from different traditions that they absorbed, including the Persians, the Byzantines, the Turks, and the Moors. So Arabic music provided a catalyst for this fusion, resulting in a rich and diverse musical tradition. So some of the instruments that they used were the lute, which is again a stringed instrument. You'll see this as a theme. It's a lot of stringed instruments with its roots in Persian music. And this is for the primary instrument that they use. Other instruments would be the frame drum or the percussion stick. And early Islamic music was primarily a vocal art form with instrumental accompaniment to kind of guide it along. And so the golden age of Islamic music, which occurred during the Abbasid Caliphate, which was a little bit later, this is considered the golden age of Islamic music. So this is where it really started to blossom. And this is also when music became integrated into higher education. So, and this is where they added other instruments and started to incorporate more instruments in the uses in their religious centers. All right. And so, to summarize this segment, instrumental music was employed in Islam in various settings, including court music, for entertainment for palaces, for caliphs and wealthy households, military music, folk music, and of course devotional music, especially in the Sufi tradition, which embraced instrumental music as a path to spiritual ecstasy, and often features instruments like the tambourine and flute, which were added. So again, debates throughout history. Throughout Islamic history, the use of instrumental music has been a subject of ongoing debate among scholars and religious leaders. Some scholars interpreted certain verses of the Quran and the Hadith as discouraging musical instruments, while others saw it as embracing it. So, and the Sufis, viewing music as more of a spiritual nourishment, saw it as a means to connect again with the divine, while others expressed some reservations about this. So Islamic instrumental music had a significant impact on European music, with instruments like the lute and possibly guitar having origins in the Islamic world and continuing into the Renaissance. Which brings us to the early church and vocal tradition within Christianity. So the early church primarily practiced vocal music and chanting, often referred to as a cappella singing, which means in the style of the chapel or the church, according to the Knollwood Church of Christ. So this is interesting. So again, this comes back to there were debates within the early church as well over the role of instrumental music. Surprise, surprise. Seeing a theme here. And the New Testament emphasizes singing and praise but it doesn't mention instrumental music exclusively or specifically. So instrumental music began to be used in Christian worship in the West with the Roman Catholic Church and other denominations gradually adopting the practice. And the organ is cited as the first instrumental musical instrument introduced into church worship. And so we have all seen churches with magnificent organs or small organs, and this is kind of where that began. And let's see here. Oh, and today, instrumental music is widely used in many Christian denominations with a variety of instruments and styles incorporated. However, some denominations maintain a traditional focus on only instrumental music, which kind of comes from the Restoration movement within the Christian tradition. So you'll see things like the Churches of Christ or the Disciples of Christ, which are two branches of the Restoration movement within Christianity, which came out of Presbyterianism, which is a whole nother thing. And it's like you see kind of where it weaves and twists and goes. And of course within that, there's always, I found it relates to kind of fundamentalist versus more moderate forms of different religions. So within Islam, the Sufi, and the two branches of Islam, one embraced it, one did not. So within Christianity, you have this Restoration movement, and within that Restoration movement, one movement, the Disciples of Christ, embraced instrumental music, and of course, the Churches of Christ chose not to. So that was interesting. And let's see here. Then we get to within, actually, you know what? Let's move to, almost forgot about this one. So with Native American instrumental music, which kind of, again, relates to, on this continent. So some instruments that were common for them would be drums and flute, pan flute, and other instruments like that. And they are, and again, within the Native American tradition, is seen as a way of bringing people closer to the divine. So that seems to be the thing with that. Again, it's not common with other religions. Bringing people closer to the divine is a tool of doing that, and often a tool of devotion, personal devotion. And then, of course, as we began to infiltrate, other cultures began to take over Native American lands, we saw the infiltration of other instruments into their tradition as well. So they began to utilize, much like in the Islamic world, they began to utilize the instruments of the lands they conquered. In this case, the conquered were using and adapting instruments from the people that were conquering them. So that was interesting. So then, going back to this, we have within Christianity, it's been quite a bit just within that. You can have 10 seminars just on this. But within the Christian tradition, instrumental music began appearing during the Renaissance period. And then from then, that's when early organs were developed. So that was when some of the first pipe organs were developed. And of course, they had pan flutes and other various instruments as well. And so when you hear a lot of Renaissance music, a lot of that was started in the early Renaissance church from the 1600s. So, and then moving on to today, then you have the Roman Catholic Church, which began to introduce some musical instruments, and then other denominations, Protestant denominations, began to use organs and other instruments. And again, moving on to the Restoration movement, which began in the late 1800s, we saw kind of a breakaway of some churches, again, mainly the churches of Christ. Not to be confused with the United Church of Christ, that's different. Which one is mainline Protestant, one is not. And so that's kind of, and they began to use a cappella singing as their only source of music. And then we get into today where with debates continuing. So now you've ever heard of the worship, who here has heard of the term worship wars? Any raise of hands? The worship wars? So in a lot of traditions you have, this is a debate going back to even the 1960s where contemporary Christian music began to infiltrate churches. And so you would have debates of do we keep the organ? Do we incorporate drums and guitars in worship? And so different expressions and forms of worship. So this was a debate that still continues today. You'll see some churches offer a blended service. You'll see some traditions offer traditional, some offer more a different, broader, worship with different instruments from different cultures and religions. So you'll see often in, of course, UU churches and, of course, Unity and other, other groups, you'll see that there's the incorporation of a lot of different instruments from different cultures and different religions. So it's interesting how that comes together. But the one thing that ties it together is you have a lot of stringed instruments, and you have a lot of instruments that are flute formed. So, and then of course in Judaism, you have some instruments that are like the shofar. So the shofar is one of those instruments, much like cymbals, which in several of these different religions, from Buddhism on up to Judaism, you'll see, and Islam, you'll see that or a horn used to signify the beginning or the end of worship. So, or different points in the service. So that's very interesting. And so I have a couple different things to share, because what musical presentation would be complete without some actual music? So here we have, this will be the pan flute. And that is kind of a wooden instrument, typically made out of bamboo. And then we have some other things. Who's here has heard of a singing bowl? And you can see they strike it and then they use this around the rim, and then it makes it sing on its own. Really beautiful effect. And different types of singing bowls also signify different chakras, so different parts of the body. And the different parts of the body will respond to different bowls. And here's another different type of bowl, singing bowl, and some again are made of crystal. This one is made of bronze, very traditional in the Tibetan tradition. It's very beautiful. And then, of course, my favorite, I'm going to take this thing with me for this part, because I noticed there's a lot of instruments around here. So around here we have several instruments that are kind of cool. So we have this one, of course, different mallets and stuff, but we have chimes. And of course, that is lovely. And then we have so different types of chimes, and that's often used in a lot of older Protestant congregations. You'll hear like a chime or the ringing of a bell that will begin a service of worship. And of course, over here we have some fun instruments. I like hands-on stuff, so. And that's the tambourine. And again, that would be something used in a lot of celebratory practices in various different religions. So, a lot of fun. So, that's about it, if anybody has any questions. Yes, so pipe organs were developed, I almost forgot about this, it was in the notes, but I forgot. So pipe organs were originally developed for worship, but also for really wealthy people. So a lot of times you'll see castles or other great Renaissance buildings, and you'll see that they actually had incorporated a lot of these organs. Now, they wouldn't be pipe organs in terms of like the massive ones we see now, but because they would have been hand pumped originally. So these organs would be smaller, typically no bigger than about half of the size of that doorway there, or just those two doors in there. Usually one manual or one keyboard. So usually you'd have maybe 100 pipes total for the whole instrument. And everything would be mechanically connected to the pipes that would open and close them for the air to go through. And they would be hand pumped. So someone would be standing with a bellows going into the instrument, hand pumping it before the blowers were invented. Oh, a big church pipe organ would probably be about 5,700 pipes would be your average. A lot of pipes.
That is a lot of pipes.
2,500 to 5,700. So that would be anywhere from like a 2-manual organ to like a larger instrument. And some organs are hybrid organs now. So you have some instruments that are part pipe and part digital. So you'll have a console, which is what you call where you play the instrument from. So it's a keyboard. And some will have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 or 5 keyboards. And it could even have up to 16,000 pipes. There's one that's at the Boardwalk Hall in New Jersey, Atlantic City, New Jersey, I think. And it has I think it's the world's largest pipe organ, and I believe it has something like 7 manuals and about, I think, 23,000 pipes. So yes, there is a pipe organ at Eastminster where I go. So we had a digital organ since the building was built in the 1960s, and we somewhere along the lines, I decided I needed to get some more hymnals for our church, for our pews. So I went to a church that was closing and jokingly said, "What are you going to do with that old pipe organ over there from 1898? Oh, we're going to scrap the metal. Oh, hold on a minute." So I made a few calls, and we had it transported to our church and installed in our balcony, which was originally designed for a pipe organ, but we never put one in. And so we had it installed in its original form. The only difference is we've electrified the blower, so it doesn't have a hand pump anymore. It actually has a blower. But it is an instrument from 1898. It's called a tracker organ. So tracker organs, if you see the word tracker, it means these little pieces of wood or metal that directly connect the key to valves in the pipes. And that opens and closes those valves mechanically so the air can go through and then resonate and create the sound in the pipe. Oh, you know what? I also should play a clip of an organ. You know, that would be helpful. Oh, and here's a zither. We'll do the zither first. And it's a plucked string instrument, so you can kind of see it there. You pluck it. But now back to the organ. Because the organ is my favorite instrument, by the way. I play the organ very badly, but it is a lot of fun. Here we go. Here's some Renaissance organ music. And this is a 1-manual instrument, so 1 keyboard. And you can see that he's playing it there. And that is also a tracker organ, so it's mechanically connected, and someone is hand pumping that somewhere, probably behind the instrument. And organ music is great because if you think of who here has heard of a synthesizer, like you've seen a synthesizer like a digital one, so the organ is basically the original synthesizer. So you're combining different colors of sound. So each of these different sets of pipes has a completely different sound. You'll have flute pipes, you'll have things that sound like trumpets, stringed instruments, and you're combining those into a whole cohesive sound, and you're creating that from your console with little knobs that you push and pull to turn on those whole sets of pipes. So that you're basically combining sounds and colors just like you would in a synthesizer that's digital. Oh yes, that brings me to my next recording, which is a carillon. So a carillon, someone takes different, and this is in a bell tower, they hit it with their fist, and it's a keyboard, and each one of those strings is attached to a bell. So that's kind of cool. And of course, here's a, let me see if I can find and here's a bigger carillon. That's what I was looking for. Here we go. And you can see the different bells here. I'll bring it down. And someone is, again, hitting them with their fists on that keyboard, and that's the sound you get. And a lot of times, kind of going back to musical instruments being used to signify the start or the end or different portions of worship, that's what the carillon was for. So it would signify the beginning or the end of worship and also major events for the community. So let's say in our country, you have the Bach Tower Gardens. If you haven't been there, you have to go. Beautiful gardens and a beautiful carillon, the only one in the state.
Yeah.
And then I would add also with these carillons and also bells, church bells. So when the American Revolution was happening, of course, churches rang their bells in Boston. So that's something that's historical to not only the church, but the state. So very interesting time in our history. And just a few days ago, or maybe a week ago, I don't remember when, they commemorated the ride of Paul Revere, and they rang the church bells. So
I think we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so
Yes.
much for being here today. Yay!
Thank you.
Good to have you.